Hello, 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 family. How are you today? My name is Quanisha Johnson. I am a licensed counselor and educator, and I have been coming to you for the past few months with a different theme each month. And so we are now embarking upon a new theme, theme number 4. We have discussed our families and those dynamics, discussed Black women, discuss children and the issues and things that impact them and how to support them. And this month, the month of May, we are starting theme 4, which is going to cover and talk about relationships. Relationships between Black women and Black men, the dynamics of those relationships, how to support each other. And so today, specifically, our theme for session 1 title is going to be about gender roles. So let's get it started. I hope that today we can learn something and grow together and get information that's helpful to live the best possible life and have the best possible relationships. Okay. So as I was just explaining to you, we are going to be talking about fostering healthy relationships between Black men and Black women. So important. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about gender roles, stereotypes, and the impact that those things have on relationships. So gender roles, stereotypes, and the impact on relationships. And so as you can see here, this picture, when we look at it, we can come up with different perceptions and ideas of what we see. And there are different men and women in these pictures. And we have a woman who's a mother that appears to be a woman who is working, a father, a man who's in a career. And then at the top right, we have a man and a woman in relationship, seeming to be in some type of relationship conflict. And so today's conversation is going to be about just kind of how we see things, what we've been taught, the different, how these things we've been taught impact how we interact with one another. So it's very important to look at it from that standpoint. And like I said, you can look at this picture and have different ideas. Different things may pop in your head about what you've learned, about what women should do, what men should do, what that looks like, and different roles and responsibilities. You may be involved in a relationship and have these areas of your life impacted based upon what you've been taught from your family, from society as a whole. And so let's talk some about gender roles. Let's look at what that exactly looks like. So gender roles are ideas and expectations created by society to determine how women and men should behave, right? They're created by society to determine how men and women should behave. So then I underline gender role expectation. So then we have role expectations, and they often differ depending on what culture you are a part of. And remember, we can be a part of a culture, a smaller culture, a group of people that we are born into a family that has a certain set of rules and values. And then there's a greater societal culture. So there's different subcultures that exist, but there are different gender role expectations that come along with that. And so they differ according to that. And so gender role beliefs definitely and absolutely impact identity development. So we develop how we see ourselves, what role we believe we should play based upon those beliefs that are passed down or given to us. And so I give an example of very recently, and I'm not sure if this is passed down, but ultimately, this is something I heard my own child repeat. My daughter, who's a 12-year-old, said to my 7-year-old son, "Why are you jumping around and you're not being still, and why are you acting that way?" Right? She's 12, a little critical. And he said to her, "Because I'm a boy." Like, I'm supposed to act like this. And so ultimately, I'm not sure exactly. It's for me to do some reflection. I'm not sure where he got this idea from, whether it's from watching something that he witnessed within the home, his peers. I'm not sure. But at 7 years old, he already made this connection of, if I'm not sitting still and I'm doing this and I'm jumping up and down and I have this role, this is the role a boy is supposed to play. And certainly there are some biological aspects of, like, just, the activity of being a 7-year-old in general, and then certain things probably, that boys behave a different way than girls, are more, maybe more active. So there may be some truth to that, but just ultimately just the idea of just correlating how I am supposed to behave and justifying that already at 7 years old and saying, this is what boys just do. So developing, often gender role beliefs impact how we develop how we see ourselves. Gender role beliefs impact one's personal choices, so what we choose to do. So there's a belief system, and then we decide on what we need to do or what we're supposed to do based upon that. And these are some examples of that. So we have, as we get older, I gave examples of children, because these ideas and expectations, they don't start when we're 25. They don't start when we are 15, actually. They actually start very, very early, these ideas and expectations, and they're instilled very early. So like I said, I'm not sure where my son got that from, and I'm not going to, blame anything, outside. It may be something that I need to look at within my own home. And so ultimately, I do think of, like, children, they copy adults. They absorb their environments. So we have, these examples I'm going to give, are based upon adults, but children are absorbing their environments. So they may perceive, they see gender roles within their home. They see mom doing something, dad doing something, or grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle, whomever they live with. And then they make those assumptions. They say, okay, they see mom doing XYZ. They see dad doing ABC. And so ultimately, in terms of identity development, making personal choices, the examples are family decision-making. So, like, how we're going to decide to have our family, who's going to be the primary caregiver or the one to stay home. They impact, gender role beliefs impact how we date, and, like, who we get married to, when we decide to get married, right? All of these different things, the type of person we want to marry, how we raise our children. I gave that example again of my son. Like I said, I'm going to be reflective of that to see what my husband and I may be instilling, or maybe repeating, or he's absorbing something in his environment. But how we raise our children. Absolutely, our career decisions, what are our career aspirations, how we see achievement. Like, we do that. We go, how do we see what types of careers that we're supposed to get into? How do we correlate success, achievement based upon these gender role expectations and gender role beliefs? And human behavior in general, i.e. sexual behavior, the way that it is seen that men are supposed to, there's this correlation of men are supposed to see sex this way and women are supposed to see sexual behavior that way. And those roles are that way. And there's a lot of judgment affiliated with that. And that is an example of just human behavior. So making personal choices based upon gender role beliefs, and these are examples of that. So this is some things we've been taught. This is not an all-encompassing list. You, as I'm reading it or talking about it a little bit, can add to it yourself. And I am giving you some general things that we've been taught. But like I said, it's not everything. So in general, there's an appropriate way to behave, or for our behavior. There's an appropriate way to behavior. So let's say, for example, I would say, this is what a woman should be doing. This is what a man should be doing. So then these categories exist, and that this is appropriate, and this behavior this way to dress, this way to behave, this way to act. This is the way it's supposed to be for this group of people. This is the way it's supposed to be for that group of people. So, for example, that men are masculine, assertive, aggressive, and are supposed to be dominant. And on the other end, we have women who are feminine, sensitive, and even listen to how I change my voice, right? Ultimately. So when I said men are masculine, assertive, aggressive, dominant, right? And then women are feminine. So look at the conditioning, because I even didn't plan to do that. Like ultimately, like, sitting up straight. And when I said these words, but when I said the words associated or affiliated with women that we've been taught, feminine, sensitive, I almost shrunk a little bit and didn't even realize I did it. Yielding to others, we're supposed to be compassionate, right? So this is the way that men behave. These behaviors are masculine behaviors, and these behaviors are feminine behaviors. This is what we've been taught. There is a subset of that. And I only gave examples of masculine behaviors. And so, and this is appropriate. So it's appropriate for women to behave in a feminine way. It's inappropriate for men to behave in a feminine way. So ultimately, we learned this, we've been taught this. And absolutely now things are changing so much. And it makes me so happy that we're not ascribing certain labels and there's more freedoms. But this is generally what it looks like and what is ascribed to these gender roles. And this is the appropriate way. And so although, like I said, things are changing, we still have some very, very archaic ways of seeing gender role and the expectations. So then we have our stereotypes. And stereotypes, basically, society attributes certain characteristics to groups of people in order or as a means to classify them. There's preconceived ideas that negatively impact how we see people. So all stereotypes may not be deemed as negative, but these are just preconceived ideas. This is how we see you. I have this idea. I may not have all of the information, but this is how I'm seeing you. And so gender stereotypes are often, or just stereotypes in general, are shortcuts. So you are receiving, all of this information about a person and all of the stimuli, right? And what a stereotype allows you to do is not do the work and just to kind of go category, putting this person or this, not even a person, this group category. So immediately, if I see a Black woman, then I don't know if her name is Sheila, Martha, Taisha, Tawana, and it doesn't matter. Then if I'm doing a gender stereotype, Black woman category, boom. So I automatically ascribe that Black woman to this category. This is just what it is. And I said Black woman, but it could be woman category. So there's shortcuts. I have no understanding of who she is, what she does. I know nothing about her, but then it's that shortcut because now I am just saying category. So it's very, very limiting in nature. And basically roles are assigned to people that represent them in no way, shape, or form. I've heard so many very, very ignorant things. I'm mentioning again, as a Black woman, stereotypes about Black women that are absolutely untrue. So, and it's very, as I stated, limiting in nature. And so I've heard the most ignorant thing. I've given an example of the assumption that I've heard that, and this is not from people that look like me. So the assumption in many instances from, let's say, for example, white men, when they see Black women, and not all, remember, this is not meaning all, giving an example, and in general, it is not specifically stating every single white male thinks this way, but assuming and making the category, I've heard this, that the stereotype of a Black woman as a welfare queen. That a Black woman is a welfare queen, whatever a queen of welfare would mean, and has a lot of children, and just all of these negative, stereotypical, limiting in nature ideas that have no basis of truth. So we're talking about gender stereotypes that limit people. So now, even if I am a person who encountered one person in my lifetime, or I read one article, or I got information from one person, how do I take that information, even if it was two people, and then now an entire group of people, I'm attributing these characteristics, these belief systems to a group of people, and now I have classified them and categorized them this way. And so gender stereotypes often cause unequal and unfair treatment, because in those stereotypes, someone's going to be at the bottom of the totem pole. Someone's going to be at the bottom of it. So let's talk now about the history of gender roles for Blacks. So let's talk about how, like that, the historical part of it, of giving some reason as to how we're here. So what was it like for the enslaved Black woman? This is a question. What was her role? So we've talked about this before in our previous session when we talked about Black women. The enslaved Black woman was expected to cook, to clean, labor in the fields, produce the children, which were investments to the slave master, and care for, and also when she was able to keep her own children close by, she was also responsible for the care of the slave owner's children as well. Then used as a sexual object, objectified, used for sex, her body utilized that way, right? No value, right? Dehumanizing, right? This person bears children, and the children are my investment. This woman is my sex object for me to lay with her at any time that I want to, because I don't see her as a human being. And so what was life like for the enslaved Black man? What was his role? So the enslaved Black man, of course, laborer. You're there to work, to toil as an animal, and targeted often to emasculate. Targeted to emasculate. And what does emasculation look like in this situation? So we're talking about beating, we're talking about mutilation, we're talking about all of this done in front of the women and children, and then right in front of their eyes, ripping and breaking family. Like, that this is, although slaves didn't legally marry or weren't allowed to, that your wife, your partner, you're separated from them, your children are separated, your families are broken apart, and feeling as though you can't even protect them, because when you go to try to protect them, then you are harmed, they're harmed, and so much to target them and to emasculate them and to make them feel like nothing, once again, to make them feel like they were not human. And so from this point on, we start with these roles that were given that we didn't create, that historically, when we're talking about being, before coming to the Americas, what life looked like in Africa. We talked about that when we talked about the Black woman and just culture, and even the how Black women, how African women carried themselves, what their hair represented. That was all changed when we got here, when we were stolen and taken here. And so ultimately, there is always a historical framework to what is going on right now, to what is happening. And we need to look at it from those standpoints, and not necessarily to justify behaviors, but more so to understand. So these gender roles, this started then. This is what women, it started with, women, Black women, this is the category you're going to be put in. This is your role. Black men, this is your role. Not a role that you created for yourself, that was passed down through your family, but this is what's given to you. More history. So we're just going to go a little bit through, the history of everything. Like, we started there. Of course, we have post-slavery. And so with post-slavery, when we're talking about every barrier put in place for oppression, every barrier possible. So you are free, but you're not. So we have Black codes, Jim Crow, every way to continue to make barriers to oppress was put in place. Black men and Black women at times labored equally, right? So we couldn't even say, the idea of like now the Black man went out to work and the women, primarily were the caregivers taking care of the home. No. In many instances, in most instances, Black men and Black women had to, for their family, for financial gain, had to work. You're oppressed. You don't have the opportunities and you need to make money. And so you found after post-slavery, the labor, men and women were laboring equally so that they could have money to provide for their family. And then we see, beginning like in the early 1920s, we see some shifts occurring due to education. So we have the kind of emergence of the HBCUs. And so then we see these gender roles change somewhat due to class structure. And Black women we see, an emergence more in the political realm, social and the economic worlds. And then also we see more of a shift with the civil rights movement and Black women taking more of a prominent role in those eras, right? So ultimately, looking at it from that standpoint, and I just want to go back, even looking at just kind of starting at that post-slavery time period. And remember, just because we're talking about, during slavery, the roles that we're discussing, that post-slavery era, and for men, for Black men also, lynching. So they have what was supposed to be freedom, but not freedom, lynchings, more beating, destroying of their properties, not receiving the opportunities to have business or work, or just for any way, shape, or form to be on the journey to equality, and so that during this time, so we're talking about a lot of what was going on for Black women, what was going on for Black men during the era that connected to these gender roles and how they played out over time. And then, so if we just fast forward, so we're at civil rights, and then fast forwarding to, let's say like the 1980s, the early, that time period. And then there's drops in employment, fewer jobs. So here we are again, fewer jobs for Blacks and specifically Black women. And so now, there's systemic racism. Then there's so many different means continuing to oppress. We see mass incarceration. And so with mass incarceration, so now we see the impact of now the family dynamics change, because now we have women who now are needing to take on these roles where they're now identifying as doing the role of the mother and the father within the home, and they're heads of households, and they're taking on different roles and responsibilities. And so all of these things play into or connect to when we're talking about gender roles, stereotypes, the history, and looking at it from the standpoint of how it started to where it is now. And so looking at it from that standpoint. And so if we even think about Black women, we're talking about race, but we're talking also about, being a woman. And so we're talking about just being a part of two, as a Black woman, marginalized groups. And so we have to understand the intersectionality of that as well. And so often in this, not that Black men aren't discredited, but Black women being discredited. Right. So when, when there's drops in employment, as we said, then guess who's getting hit even harder? Black women. And so there's just this great impact of just gender stereotypes. And we have to keep that in mind, that, we're talking about them, but they have a great impact. And so when we talked a few, I guess a couple of months back, I believe, and our theme was about the Black woman, we talked about just this strong Black woman schema, and that Black women felt that they had to ascribe to, that they had to maintain. And the characteristics of this would be a perceived obligation to present this image of strength, an obligation to hold back or suppress their emotions, resistance to being vulnerable and dependent on others for help, motivation to succeed despite help from others, and prioritizing caregiving and not balancing that with self-worth. So feeling the need, and this, remember, we talked about this starting during slavery, getting these roles, being dehumanized. You could take anything, you could experience anything, have the babies, get back up and have the baby, labor, and so that baby's my investment. I can put that baby out to work and then go right back and do it all over again. No care, you're not a human being. So just like creating this this Black woman's schema that was created, based upon also that, and then what we saw in the media, these titles and stereotypes given to Black women. So this was the answer to that. So when we see these stereotypes, these roles that, expectation, there was an answer to it. And so we're looking at this as not really in a healthy way. We're talking about health. I'm a mental health professional. So I'm always looking at, of course, physical health, but I'm very much so looking at the mental health portion of it and how these stereotypes, how these role expectations impact. And as we see with these characteristics for women, not in a positive way. And so let's look at what it does for men. So here, let's look at toxic masculinity. And with toxic masculinity, what it is cultural and societal pressure for men to behave a certain way to perpetuate this idea of manliness. At times, the idea of manliness promotes this aggression, homophobia, this domination, often over women. And all things feminine are devalued, and that's even women. So women are associated with being feminine, and they're devalued as a result of it. So there's this toughness, as I stated, anti-feminine, power, even violent at times, to promote this idea of what it means to be masculine. And then, of course, once again, in talking about mental health, rejecting the idea of expressing emotions and being vulnerable. That those things go against being masculine. You can't express your emotions. You can't be vulnerable. And so I am going to, if we're talking about this hyper masculinity, I'm going to assert myself in a way that supports this idea of I am masculine if I do these things, even if it harms women, even if it harms myself, even if it is not the best thing for me to do, but I'm under this pressure to do this and be this way. So stereotypes definitely, as we're talking about now, they do in most cases harm mental health. We talked about that strong Black woman. So look at as a result of women feeling as though that they have to now have this image of strength. So remember, we went back and said dehumanized, treated a certain way, ascribe certain roles. And then in the media, certain images. So now we are kind of trying to maintain this new role and fight back against it, but then as a result, harm ourselves. And so Black women, more prone to develop high blood pressure, obesity. Then we have experiencing as Black women high rates of depression compared to the general population, because we have to do these things. So remember, we have to maintain this identity, right? Being strong, maintaining, taking care of things. And so then often, as we stated before, not being believed, being stereotyped and put in a group. And so treated a certain way as a result of. So when we're, we talked about this when we talked about that theme of the strong Black woman, of not being believed when they go to the doctor. So not even wanting to go to the doctor, not even wanting to, talk about what ails them or what pains them or issues they have, because they feel as though as a Black woman, they are now put into this category, and stereotypes are assigned to them and they're seen a certain way, which in return makes them behave a certain way. So more anxiety is chronic in Black women, and the symptoms are more intense than white counterparts. And for Black men, we talked about that masculinity, holding on to that masculine ideal as a way to deal with distress. Suicide rate is twice as high for Black men than it is for Black women, right? So just holding on to this idea that masculine is the way, or I'm even going to utilize, if I'm going through something, if I'm experiencing some form of distress, some mental or emotional distress, I could pour, myself into my work success. And that my work success as a man is going to kind of be the cure-all for dealing with any type of emotional or mental distress in my life, which we know that's not accurate, that is not going to alleviate the pain that you're experiencing mentally or emotionally. Even the idea in terms of these masculine ideals to deal with the distress, the whole notion of manning up, man up, and so this is how these ideas and these role expectations, how they cause harm. Because if you feel as a woman you have to behave a certain way, do a certain thing, not express how you feel, hold it on, care for everyone, you're last, you're just going to be put last, your needs don't matter, you're a Black man and you feel that you have to hold on to this idea of manliness, you're hurting inside internally, but you have to, man up and behave this way, you can't express yourself because there's this pressure to be this way, you're still fighting against the residuals and the ills of what slavery, the roles assigned, you're fighting against it. And so, of course, less likely to seek Black men help for mental health, right? So these are just ways that it causes harm. So we see the individual ways that these role expectations, these stereotypes placed upon us cause an issue. So let's now talk about relationships. So the topic and what we're going to be focusing on is like, how do we have these healthy relationships with one another? So we had to obviously look at things separately, but then we have to look at it also cohesively, right? Because we are in relationship with one another. And so in looking over time at the family impact, specifically how women are impacted, what impacts our children, let's think about our relationship dynamics. How do all of these things come together? So of course, when there are these role expectations and there are these stereotypes, about what you should be doing, what this looks like, there's misunderstanding and there's judgment. There's misunderstanding and judgment between one another. Both Black men and women we're just up against a host of these stereotypes about the other, right? So society perpetuates something. And so we're up against these stereotypes and how we see each other. And so there had been so much talk over this past year during the pandemic. And then we have, our social justice movements where people are, coming together in protest against injustice, racial injustice, social injustice, really beginning when we witnessed the murder of George Floyd. And just these conversations I heard so much about just they emerged, and not that they're new conversations, but like, Black men needing to protect Black women and debates. I knew of people personally that were in debate with Black men and women in relationship with one another and in debate. So we're having this oppression that we're both coming together to fight against. But then I would be privy to information that certain relationships, Black men and Black women, of people that I knew, were fighting against one another or in topic, and there were articles written about Black men not protecting Black women, and them both having perspective about how the other doesn't support the other. And while we're fighting oppression, then we saw them fighting against each other. And in a way where there's misunderstanding, there's judgment about what you should be doing for me as a Black woman and what I should be doing for you as a Black man, and so on and so forth, and what that looked like. And so kind of fighting against the stereotypes, fighting against who women feeling undervalued, underprotected, and then men feeling in their own way of how they're not respected as Black men. And so these debates happening. But we want to understand that those judgments and those misunderstandings, that we got to figure out how to come together. And the mental health implications of it all, the relationship, the damage on the relationships because of these stereotypes, these roles, and that we do need to figure out how do we need to support each other. So sometimes what happens is that we turn away from each other because we don't want to deal with what we've been taught, that headache that person gives, right? I don't want to deal with that. If this is that kind of man or that kind of woman, I don't want to deal with that. I don't know a lot about that person, but I know that from what I know, I'm going to categorize this person as such. And because of what I've been taught, what society says, what my family says. And then now I'm not getting to know who they are. I'm just putting them in that category and I don't want to deal with it. And then sometimes on the other end, we try to perform or pretend in an attempt to prove that stereotype wrong. So if I feel as often as a Black woman that I have been placed in this box, the stereotype now that Black women have an attitude, or Black women are sassy, or Black women talk back, whatever that may mean, right? And so now I'm going to perform or pretend something, and it's not organic, it won't be natural, but I don't want to be perceived a certain way. So now I have to put a performance together because I don't want to be perceived as in this category, in this box of this is what Black women do. So I'm performing and pretending because I don't want to be perceived a certain way. So then I'm doing all of this, just to fight against this assumption, this misunderstanding, this judgment. And it will indeed impact if I'm trying to be in a relationship with someone or get to know someone and them get to know me. It's not organic. And so these ideas from society and family about gender roles impact our dating and relationship and marriage life. We just see it different. We see it different. And so ultimately, if I think I'm going to be deemed now as mean, I have an attitude, even Black women, I don't even know how many years ago this was, but this whole idea of the resting BITCH face, I'm going to be polite and just spell it out. And only hearing that connected to Black women. I mean, I could be absolutely wrong, but only hearing that connection that we have an attitude, our face, and we look mean. But then on the end, then to be feminine is to be. Remember those stereotypes that feminine means compassionate, it means caring, it means gentle. So then I'm trying to figure out how to be that. Then I don't want my face to look a certain way because then it's going to look like I have an attitude. So much confusion, so much misunderstanding, and so much judgment that impacts our relationships, how we see one another. So how do we get along? It makes such a difference, absolutely and positively. So as a result, we have to look at what do we do with all of this information? How do we look at it? How do the gender roles and stereotypes, how do they impact us? How do we move forward? How do we make sure that we're not at odds with one another, and making sure that we are looking at it from a standpoint of trying to heal and trying to grow individually and together? And so ultimately, practicing self-love. We're going to be talking about that more this month, what self-love is. And first and foremost, I want to just kind of explain just the idea of love being an action word. It's not something that we say. And that's why often it's very easy to be at odds with someone, upset with someone, and then just say, well, I don't want to be around them or be with them because they did something that I don't like, or they said something I don't like. And so when we think about love, it's an action word. It's not always a feeling. We're not always going to feel great about the people we love. They're going to upset us. They're going to say something we don't like. And so the idea of love is action. It's not a feeling. It's not just a feeling. You don't just feel love, because there are going to be times where you feel like you don't want to be bothered, or you feel like that person upset you. So we got to practice. In order for us to love others appropriately, we have to love ourselves. And there has to be a level of self-acceptance, of accepting ourselves for who we are and not for who people say that we're supposed to be or who we are, and not try to kind of like get to that level or that place where that's our achievement. So practicing loving ourselves for who we are, and kind of dismantling any ideas about like, this is the box that you're put in. This is what Black men do. This is who Black men are. This is what Black women do. This is who Black women are. This is your role. This is what the expectation for it. Meet it, or you're not good enough, or I'm going to judge you, or you're less than. So practicing your self-love is ultimately practicing self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-compassion. And then on the next end, having the ability to extend that to others, but starting with you first and foremost. So the way that we kind of understand and work through the gender role expectations being stereotyped, and how it impacts us coming together in relationship with one another, is that we are making sure that we're practicing self-love so that we can give love. Identify and acknowledge the impact of history. So we talked very briefly about the historical portion of everything. And remember, when we're talking about history, it is not so that we can excuse behaviors or justify behaviors, give a pass to behaviors. It is so that we are aware. So we identify and acknowledge, the history of gender role expectations, where they came from, and when I say historically speaking, I'm talking about going back. We can go back hundreds of years ago, but let's look at also the history of our family, right? What's passed down. We can go back, but we can directly connect it to our own families. What is the impact of history? Identifying that, understanding dehumanizing Black men, Black women, what that looked like. That was similar for both, but it looked different for Black men and for Black women, even though there were some parallels, many parallels, they look different. The mistreatment was different in certain ways. And so understanding that and how that plays into everything that we talked about with history, how that plays into gender role expectations and stereotypes, how oftentimes, when we are looking at it from the standpoint of that time frame and looking at now what the connections are. And oftentimes we don't realize that we're still fighting against certain things. So much growth has occurred, right? And and more freedoms in terms of like, how do you want to live your life? How do you want to show up? Fighting against this idea of masculine and feminine, right? So much has changed, absolutely. So we're not boxed into these things, but we need to understand where it comes from and identify it and understand how it might hold us back and we don't even realize it. Being mindful of media and the role that media plays in perpetuating certain ideas, even of what we should look like, how we should speak, what we should wear, what our relationships should look like. I talked about this before, just the idea of just even being on social media specifically. I'm not talking just about media like movies and television, just on social media and looking at relationships, because we're talking about relationships and the whole idea of like couple goals. And so ultimately we got to be mindful of what we're taking in, what we're seeing, and what we are saying. These ideas of this is what I think Black men should be doing. This is what Black women should be doing. And so just being mindful, because that plays out in the media and we absorb that, right? We're not at the movie theater or watching Netflix and writing down like, oh, this man is doing this, so I want my man to do this, or this woman's doing this, but we're absorbing that. And then we're taking those things in, especially depending on how much we consume it, how much of an impact it has on us. And then it's perpetuating certain ideas and we're playing that out in our relationships and it's impacting them, and not always in a positive way. We need to definitely, and I just mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, understand intergenerational family patterns. So we need to understand what we have experienced as it relates to gender role expectations and stereotypes within our own families. What was passed down? Earlier, I stated that, it starts very early, those beliefs about gender, the way that I explained with my son, those beliefs start very, very early. And so ultimately, if you're a child, in some cases, you are physically taught something like, this is what you're supposed to do. This color you're supposed to wear. This toy is what you're supposed to be playing with. Absolutely, that happens. But also that child is just kind of absorbing their environment, and they're seeing what each person's doing or what the role each person is playing on a regular basis. They're absorbing that, right? And that's how they're taking that in and deciding and creating their own, beliefs and making choices through time based upon what they see. So we got to understand, what did we absorb as Black men and Black women about what relationships with one another look like, about gender roles, about what women should be doing within the home or outside of the home, or this idea of what a man, or the idea of masculinity, this power. So should men be doing this, and or should women be doing that? And if it's not that way, it's an issue. And so ultimately, sometimes that's passed down, and it's passed down so naturally that it doesn't even seem like it's an issue, because you're just used to seeing it, absorbing it. And you're not taught in a way where someone's being malicious and wants to harm you. It's just what they know, so they just pass it on to you. And so just being very mindful of what that looks like and how it would possibly impact your relationships and how you see things. So I think it's very, very important, of course, to go and look at the past, look at what occurred before we came to the Americas as slaves. What happened in African culture? What happened during slavery? What's going on? What happened post-slavery? Understanding that, absolutely, but understanding intergenerational family patterns. What do gender role expectations look like? What are you supposed to be doing according, that's passed down, that very nonchalantly grandma told you about what it means to be married and what you should be doing as a wife, and pass that down to you, that you don't realize impacts how you see relationships. It's just being very mindful of understanding that. And of course, the connector is communication, communicating with one another effectively. So this conversation that I stated earlier, that Black men and Black women were having, the kind of verses like, you don't do this, you do this, you don't protect me. I think communication is healthy, communicating effectively, and then utilizing, we talk often about in the therapeutic world, utilizing I statements, because we don't want to walk in the light of accusing, it's always say, you don't do this for me. And as a Black man, you do this. And that's why, because I've heard it all. I've heard, well, that's why I date this race, and Black women don't do this. And then Black men, because I'm going to date this kind of person, because Black men, and that is just so divisive, that language. And we learn how to be personally accountable for our part, for our emotions, for how something impacts us, and then communicate that the right way, our relationships are better, they connect better, they're more cohesive than let's be in the blame game. And just remembering the history part, where this started, and how the division started, and being mindful and breaking that chain of that division. And so communicating effectively. And your part, communication, when you are utilizing your I statement and say, I feel, this is how this impacts me, this is what I would like to see with this relationship. If we're doing that, we're taking accountability for our part, our feelings. So just making sure that in this journey of relationship, of not judging and misunderstanding what someone's role is and what we're putting them, boxing them in a role, that we communicate our needs, our wants, who we are effectively, right? And so ultimately, of course, it circles back to getting mental health support, both Black men and Black women, dealing with your past trauma, any unresolved past issues. They may be deemed to be the past, but if they're unresolved, they will absolutely impact your future and your present and your relationships. And so really understanding that it is, it's okay to be vulnerable. And so, although in some cases, if you are, thinking about that stereotype of men don't cry, men are not supposed to express their emotions, it is only harmful. It is not helpful because then you then internalize, and that's why we see, with all of that internalizing, all of that suppression, that inward stuff, right? Keeping that in, it's killing us. It's making us sick. We have those higher rates of heart disease, strokes, dementia, right? Stress-related illnesses. And so ultimately we want to be alive and healthy and well. And so we can't just connect with these stereotypes, these expectations that harm us. And so if you're in need of support, of help to sort through it, to work through it, to know that you might, these expectations, you may have lived your life, kind of understanding that this is your role as as a man or woman. This is what I'm supposed to do, and it was debilitating. It held you back, and that you were someone as a man who understands toxic masculinity, because that was you. Get support, get help, work through it, work through past traumas, intergenerational patterns, try to understand them, any unresolved past issues. So very important to move in the forward direction, not let that hold you back. And that's how we have stronger relationships. Relationships have people in them. You're absolutely needing to be in relationship with yourself, right? Having a healthy you relationship, but you're in a relationship dynamic with a person. And so ultimately, individually work needs to be done so that collectively work can be done. So it is our time of our conversation where we are doing our reflection activity. And of course, today we have been talking about this idea of gender roles and expectations, and just how it impacts our relationships with one another. And so, of course, take out your journals and something to write with. I have a question for you, something to reflect on. And I really want you to reflect on this as we talk about this topic today. And I know we all can think of one, probably many. So I want you to think of a gender role expectation, one for a Black man and one that was given to a Black woman that you have been taught. So something that you've been taught, it could have been from family, it could have been from the media, but you were taught that information was given to you, whether it was given to you like verbatim, like this is what men do, this is what women do, or whether you absorbed it in your environment, whether you watch movies or a show growing up, and then this was the expectation. A man did this, a woman did this, and this is just the way it's supposed to be. So how has that role expectation influenced a past, current, or future relationship of yours? So I want you to think about, like, if you say, this is what, men should do, or this is what women should do. And so you have that idea because you got that information, right? That role expectation, that belief system, that was passed on to you. It was given to you, absorbed it. And so now that's in there. So when you were dating, or you're married, or you're looking for someone, or you were with someone, or you are with someone based upon this idea. It influenced it. Absolutely. The third part of this is, what gender role expectations specifically do you feel pressure to live up to? What do you feel pressure to live up to? And so I'm going to look at this and I'm going to give an example. So if I think of a gender role expectation for a Black man, I think of the example of very interesting, growing up in my household, and it didn't start with me, but it just was started with my parents, or my mom and her siblings. It was always, I suppose, okay, and I don't know if okay is the right phrase, for my mom's brothers to be able to have their girlfriends spend the night. And that a man, in terms of gender role, a man is able to, have his girlfriend over, right? It's okay. See, they're not viewed a certain way. It doesn't matter how old they are. And then the role for the young Black woman was that you could never do that. There is an expectation about how you behave. Because if you are to bring over a man to this house and they spend the night, what will you look like? So men are able to have these relationships, behave a certain way, have their girlfriends spend the night, live with them, and women cannot do that. And so that is the expectation, because you're going to be seen a certain way. Your brothers are able to do it, and then you're not. Now, although I did not have that situation where then, my mother understood that. And so what she passed on, she didn't pass on down to me that, because my brothers were not able to do that. My mother, the buck stopped right there. But there was still this idea of, this is what you're able to get away with as a black male, and this is what you're able to get away as a Black young lady. And these are things that you can do that are okay, or that they can do that are okay, that you cannot do, that you absolutely cannot do. And so absolutely looking at it from that standpoint, it does influence your relationship, because you always already see men a certain way, that they're able to get away with certain things or get a pass on certain things. And for example, so then, like I said, she didn't pass down specifically that example to me about like having someone stay the night at the house. Like my brothers were able to, but that wasn't what she got passed down. But still the idea of, you can do this and you can't do that. And I'm the oldest, so I was still putting those categories. So ultimately, just let's give with that, the idea of, as a woman, you have to be the person who's responsible for all of the cleaning in your home. And if someone were to come to your home and something was not clean and not organized, then no one looks at the man, they look at you. And so the pressure is on you. I don't care how much you work. I don't care if you take care of children, that is your responsibility. And if it is not together, then the man gets the pass. No one looks at him, but they all look at you. And so thinking of, being married, and then I'm like, somebody's coming over and I'm scrambling and gambling because I want it to be perfect, because now what's been passed on to me is that this is how, a man is seen. This is how you're seen. And so ultimately in this relationship dynamic, I'm losing it trying to get things together. And my husband's looking at me like, it's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. So that's how, if I think of role expectation and influencing current relationship, how something can be passed down, and a role expectation, what you're supposed to do, how the boys versus the girls should behave, what the roles are, and that's passed down to look like. So how it impacted, because then I'm like, this has to be put here and this has to be done this way, and my husband's like, it's fine. And so you see the differences in that idea. And so what gender role expectations specifically do you feel pressure to live up to? And I think that would be the example for me. So I answered two within one. That would be it, where if things are a certain way, then the responsibility is on me for those things. So if my children are not together and organized, or the girls with their hair isn't done right, or like that, I'm the person that is responsible for holding all things together for the home, the way that it's cleaned, whether it's organized, the way that the children look. And that is the pressure that I have. And if it's some way those things are not together, then I feel that I am not living up to the role that is set before me. So that's something I reflect on, that I think about, is it healthy to be that way? So we write these journal prompts so that we can be in reflection of the topic of whatever we're talking about. How does it apply to us in our lives? How do we see gender role? How do stereotypes impact us? What patterns are passed down? How does that impact our relationships? So just wanting you to like kind of think about that, think about what we've talked about today, think about those expectations, and in what you can do differently, what you're doing, and we reflect, so we can kick ourselves, because we operate in self-compassion always, but just that we can have a healthy relationship with ourselves and a healthy relationship with others. So, as always, I am so happy that I was able to have this conversation, and I look forward to the next one. And make sure, as we're talking about relationships, that you are practicing self love by taking care of yourself and then taking care of each other. And of course, doing everything that you can to be well mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. And I'll see you next time. Take care.